If you're reading this, it means I finally got far enough away. Far enough that their syrupy voices can't find me, that the smell of smoked meat doesn't follow me like a dog with a bone. I don't know how many others made it. I think maybe just me. But that place, Cairnstead, it wants you to think you're the first. The only. The lucky one. Cairnstead is a lie made of lace and blood. And it begins like all good lies, with a smile. I was hiking solo through the southern Appalachians, chasing solitude after a breakup that broke more than just my heart. Somewhere off the Blue Ridge Parkway, my GPS glitched. No signal, no map, just endless green and a fork in the trail that didn't exist on any official route. Left looked like the way back. But right smelled like bread. Fresh, warm, yeasty bread, rising up from the hollow below like it had no business being there. I made the worst choice of my life and followed the scent. After 40 minutes of descent, I reached it. A village. Right in the middle of nowhere. Unmarked. Not on any topo maps or ranger files. Cairnstead. Cute signs carved by hand. Fences made of woven branches and wildflowers. Wind chimes made from silver spoons. It looked like something out of a children's book, except even fairy tales have shadows. A woman was the first to greet me. Tall. Auburn hair in a braid. Apron covered in flour and what I hope was jam. Her eyes were green, but not bright, flat, like they'd been copied onto her. "Well, hello, sweet traveler," she said. "You just missed the ferry, but lucky for you, you're just in time for festival week." I didn't question what ferry. I didn't ask what festival. I followed her into town. And they all smiled. The village square was cobbled in old stone, the kind that had been laid long before highways were dreamed up. Moss crawled between each slab like veins through pale skin. There were 20, maybe 30, homes nestled around a central bonfire pit, each one painted in cheerful pastel colors. Yellow, pink, blue. I should have found it odd how perfect they looked, no chipped paint, no rusted hinges, not a single weed out of place. But by then, I'd already inhaled the bread. The moment I stepped through the gate, the smell was like a punch to the brainstem, yeast, garlic, roasted pork, and something sweeter underneath, like cherries soaking in cough syrup. My mouth watered even though I wasn't hungry. Children in white clothes skipped past me holding ribbons. A man with a long beard slapped my back and called me kinsman. Women in flower crowns cooed and touched my shoulders like I was a miracle that had wandered into their lives. It was disarming. I laughed. I let them lead me to the fire pit, where long tables had already been set. Dozens of glass jars held glowing liquids, peach orange, blood red, deep molasses black. Cured meats hung overhead from a rack, swaying in the breeze. They called it the supper of welcome. I still remember the first bite. It was a slice of meat wrapped in cornbread, glazed in a sticky reduction so dark it shimmered purple under firelight. I took one bite and felt a shudder crawl up my spine. Tender. Buttery. Unnatural. Like it came from something that had once spoken. I almost asked what it was, until I looked up and saw the entire village watching me. Not smiling. Not laughing. Just watching. Then, all at once, they clapped. The children threw petals. The man with the beard poured me a full mason jar of that black liquid. A woman named Elsabeth, who claimed to be the village keeper of hearth, looped her arm through mine and fed me the next bite herself. That night, they lit a fire so high it touched the low-hanging clouds. Dancers circled barefoot through the coals, untouched by the heat. A man played a fiddle that wept like it knew sorrow. And I ate. And drank. And laughed. And when I stumbled to sleep in a room they prepared just for me, I didn't hear the latch click from the outside. I didn't hear the lock turn. They gave me clothes the next day. Soft linen shirts. Loose pants with drawstring waists. I thought it was hospitality, old mountain generosity. Every house I visited offered snacks, sweet tea, fried meats, just a nibble, sugar. It was always phrased with this odd little urgency, like they were worried I might drop dead of hunger between porches. When I asked how long the festival lasted, they said, until the harvest, of course. That's tradition. But when I asked what was being harvested, the smiles froze. And then resumed. Each night, the food grew richer. Heavy. Dripping in sauces. Smoked cuts so marbled they nearly melted on the tongue. There was always something raw served too. Thin slices, pink and glistening, arranged in spiral patterns that looked almost ceremonial. They encouraged me to eat second helpings. Thirds. They praised my appetite. "You're putting on meat real nice," said an old woman with empty eyes and hands that trembled violently when they weren't touching me. I gained 8 pounds in 4 days. My skin looked bloated in the mirror. Red patches bloomed across my stomach like heat rash. My ankles swelled. My dreams were wet with blood. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing the sound of chewing right outside my window. Once, I looked out. And I swear I saw the same child who'd welcomed me digging in the dirt with her teeth. The illusion broke on the 5th night. I had wandered past the eastern boundary of the village, following a stone trail that dipped into the woods. I wasn't trying to escape, not yet. I just needed a break from the cloying food and the endless flattery. The trees here didn't feel real. Their bark was smooth. Their leaves never moved in the wind. That's when I smelled it. Iron. Fat. Shit. The path ended at a moss-covered hatch set into the ground. I pried it open and descended into complete blackness, my phone the only light. 20 steps down. 30. 100. At the bottom, I found them. Meat hooks. Saws. Chains. Ropes hanging from the ceiling with dried hair still clinging to them. Concrete walls stained in layers of brown, black, red, pinkish gray. Tables with grooves to catch runoff. Wooden bins full of discarded teeth and jawbones. And in the corner, a single leg. Still wearing a Nike shoe. Still warm. I vomited. I collapsed. And that's when I heard the footsteps. They didn't chase me. They didn't need to. By the time I clawed my way back up the stairs and out into the open air, the villagers were already waiting. Elsabeth stood at the front, hands clasped like she was greeting a priest. "Every harvest, someone sneaks a peek," she said, sadly. "It's always the curious ones." The man with the beard was behind her, holding a blade carved from antler. "But you're not done fattening, sugar. You've still got time." They didn't cage me. That's what made it worse. They brought me back. Dressed me in fresh linen. Apologized. Called it a misunderstanding. Sometimes our customs don't make sense to outsiders. They said I must have gone down into old ground by mistake. I pretended to believe them. I pretended I wasn't watching every hand reach for a carving knife. I pretended the little girl at dinner hadn't offered me a strip of flesh with a child's bracelet still tangled in it. But that night, I didn't eat. And I saw the smiles twist. I stayed in my assigned bed that night, lying still with the blanket pulled up to my chin like a child afraid of monsters. Outside, the music began again. Always the same tune. A waltz played slow on bowed instruments, too polished for a mountain village, but warped enough to crawl inside your skull. The fiddle screeched between verses like a dying animal begging to be let go. I could smell the cooking meat. I was too afraid to even move my head. Because someone was watching through the crack in my door. There I didn't blink. Just hovered. They left eventually. But not before I heard them whisper, "One more night, sugar." I didn't sleep. When the sun came up, I walked through Cairnstead pretending everything was fine. I smiled. I nodded. I took the food but slipped it under my shirt and dumped it when no one was looking. My stomach had started rejecting it anyway. Every time I swallowed, I gagged. My body was rebelling. And I noticed something. There was another outsider. A boy. College-aged, tall, clearly new. He looked just like I did, the first day. Wearing a fresh linen shirt. Eating with wide-eyed hunger. Laughing with the villagers as they fed him peach preserves and cured meats. I saw Elsabeth lean in and stroke his cheek. Saw her whisper something in his ear. He blushed. That was the moment I decided I couldn't just run. I had to see. I had to know what they were really doing down in the pit. So when the festival began that night, I didn't go to the fire. I went back to the hatch. This time I brought a flashlight. I crept down the stone steps, past the cold air that reeked of copper and rot. The lower I went, the more the smell changed. It wasn't just decay anymore. It was fresh. Open. Surgical. At the bottom, the slaughterhouse was alive. 3 villagers stood over a stone table, 2 men, 1 woman. They wore aprons that dripped crimson, tied with thin cords of twisted sinew. In the center of the room was the boy. Naked. Strapped down. Eyes wide. His mouth had been sewn shut. Hush, 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 crooned the woman. The cuts are cleaner when there's no screaming. They began with the legs. I watched. Frozen. The first incision ran from the inner thigh to the knee. 1 man held the bone stabilizer while the other carved around the femur like he was boning a roast. The sound the boy made through the stitches was like a wet flute played by a drunk. They didn't work fast. They worked lovingly. They carved in spirals, preserving the marbling. They wiped the blade on their tongues. When the boy passed out, the woman injected something into his neck and whispered, "Stay with us, darling, it's rude to sleep at your own carving." I pissed myself. That's what woke them up to me. The antler knife hit the wall an inch from my face as I turned and bolted up the stairs, slipping on blood and screaming loud enough to scare birds out of the trees. I heard one of them shriek behind me in a voice that cracked like lightning. "He's not ripe yet." I didn't make it far. 2 boys tackled me near the garden gate, barefoot, dressed in white, faces expressionless. They tied my hands with roots. Not rope, roots. I was dragged into the chapel. Yes, they had a chapel. A perfect white steeple that stood taller than anything else in Cairnstead. Inside, there were no crosses, no saints. Just one massive tree growing straight through the center, splitting the ceiling like a spear. The heritage tree. They tied me to it. And Elsabeth stood before me in her best dress, lace, bone buttons, a necklace made of molars. "You're not eating anymore," she said, with a kind of wounded disappointment. "That makes the meat sour. You know that, don't you?" I didn't answer. So she slapped me. Hard. Her fingers left streaks of blood across my cheek. "We let you live here. We fed you. Gave you clothes. Community. Love. And now you disrespect the soil we come from." She raised a knife. I thought she was going to gut me. Instead, she carved a small circle into my shoulder and held the skin up to the tree like an offering. The bark opened and swallowed it. "He accepts," she whispered. The heritage tree tasted my blood. When the bark split open like cracked lips and swallowed the slice of my skin, I felt something slide into me in return. Something old. Something wet. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My vocal cords had locked up, paralyzed by the weight of whatever ritual I had just become part of. Elsabeth leaned in after the offering, her breath hot and sweet, like rot masked in perfume. Her voice rasped, You're part of the soil now, sugar. Ain't no leaving what you've become. She kissed my forehead and whispered a lullaby about seeds and marrow and smoke. They left me tied there overnight, arms stretched, back pressed against the pulsing bark. I could feel the tree breathing. With every exhale, it pushed moisture through the ropes, sap or saliva, I don't know, which coated my wrists in slick heat. It took me 5 hours to chew through my own flesh. The cords were tight enough that the skin had swollen over them. I bit until I tasted bone. Until the nerves screamed with every movement. But the slickness worked in my favor. Eventually, I pulled free, the cords peeling away like gristle from a rib. I fell onto the chapel floor, my left hand flapping loosely behind me, useless, mauled, nearly unrecognizable. I staggered to the window. High. Narrow. A slit of moonlight barely wide enough to fit a grown man. I climbed. The stone scraped deep valleys into my chest and legs as I squeezed through. My torn wrist snagged on a nail in the frame and I nearly passed out. But I bit my tongue until it bled, using the copper taste to stay grounded. I dropped into the weeds behind the chapel and didn't stop to look back. The village behind me was alive with music. The fire was roaring. The people were singing. Skin to skin, blood to root bind him now so none dispute, smoke his flesh and boil his bone let no meat go cold alone. They weren't searching for me yet. They didn't think I'd get far. They thought I was theirs. I ran barefoot into the woods. The branches slashed me. My foot tore open on a rock, left a trail, I knew it, but I had no choice. The wind was too still. The forest too quiet. Like it was listening. I heard the first scream behind me about an hour later. They'd found the ropes. Found the blood. And then the hounds began. Yes, they had hounds. Not the barking kind. Not beagles or bloodhounds. These didn't bark. They gurgled. I caught a glimpse of one slinking through the trees beside me, long legs, no fur, skin stretched like sausage casing over a ribbed spine, its face a flat mask of stitched-together cheeks, eyes too wide, mouth too vertical. And when it opened its jaw, I heard a voice I recognized. One of the villagers. Singing the same lullaby as Elsabeth. Bone and belly, harvest's near, don't you run, my sweet dear, I don't know how long I ran. My vision went in and out. I fell. Hit my head. Bit through my lip. At one point I was crawling, fingers sinking into mud slicked with fat. At another, I found myself clutching a bone buried in the soil, white and long and clearly human. But I kept moving. Eventually, the forest began to thin. The air changed, real air, not the sweet sticky rot of Cairnstead. The birds came back. The trees had imperfections again, fallen branches, wormholes, signs of real life. And I saw the road. A dull gray stripe in the middle of nowhere, like a line scratched into the earth by something divine. I collapsed on the shoulder and was found just before sunrise by a state trooper who nearly drew his gun before realizing I wasn't armed, just drenched in blood, skin flayed open, lip split, and eyes wide enough to convince anyone I'd seen hell. They took me to a hospital 3 towns away. I told them I'd been attacked by wild dogs. Got lost. Fell into a ravine. I stitched together enough lies to avoid being locked in a psychiatric unit. But they didn't question the teeth. There were 24 of them. Human. Embedded in the folds of my shirt like buttons, one tied to a string around my neck I never remembered putting on. The doctors took them as evidence. The sheriff called in search teams. They combed the mountains for the next 3 weeks. But they never found Cairnstead. I didn't expect them to. It only shows itself to the hungry. They let me go eventually. I moved. Changed my name. But it doesn't help. I smell the bread sometimes. I wake up and feel the bark growing under my skin. The hunger never really leaves, you know. That's the part one wasn't ready for. The worst scar isn't the meat they took or the skin I tore for myself, it's the craving. I think the tree gave it to me. When it tasted me. When it made me part of the soil. I see people on the street and wonder how they'd cook. I hear the lullaby in grocery stores. I touch a stranger's arm and imagine it sizzling in the fire pit. God help me, I've tasted myself in dreams. So here it is, if you ever find yourself in the deep southern Appalachians, off trail, GPS dead, no signs for miles, and you suddenly smell bread, don't follow it. If you see pastel houses and a bonfire roaring bright in the day, don't wave back. And if someone says, you've arrived just in time for the festival, turn the hell around. Because Cairnstead is always hungry. And the smiles aren't smiles. They're marinades. I didn't go looking for the truth at first. I just wanted the nightmares to stop. The smell of roasting flesh, the sickly sweetness of canned peaches, and the sound of bone splitting from tendon, that one stuck with me worst of all. A wet pop followed by the gentle lull of a fiddle as someone whispered, "Hush, sugar. Don't you cry. Ain't polite to scream, for you're tender." 3 months after I escaped Cairnstead, I woke up to find roots growing under my fingernails. That was when I knew I had to go back. Not physically. Not yet. But mentally. Historically. Mythologically. Whatever the heritage tree was, it hadn't just sprouted from nowhere. It knew my name. It tasted me. And it marked me. I had to find where it began. And more importantly, if it was spreading. I started at the regional library in Asheville, North Carolina. One of those places that still smells like wet paper and old glue, with tight rows of local history journals going back to the 1800s. I wasn't looking for Cairnstead, no maps ever showed such a place. But I knew what to look for, disappearance clusters. And sure enough, in the oldest newspapers, hand-scanned and barely legible, I found them. Reports of travelers going missing in the Pisgah Forest, the Nantahala trails, the Blood Mountain paths. Always the same pattern, group of 2 to 4 hikers. Gone without a trace. Last seen near an old settlement, name changes every few decades, Briar Hollow, Devil's Reach, Whittlebones Gap, and most recently, Cairnstead. And each disappearance was preceded by rumors, strange bonfires at dusk. Laughter echoing through empty woods. Someone offering food with a smile too wide. I made a timeline. It stretched back over 140 years. The name changed. The rituals didn't. I tracked down a microfilm reel from 1892. It mentioned something peculiar. Near the old worship tree, where folks say the soil don't grow nothing but white fungus and crooked worms. They say no man's tools work near it, axe is blunt, and the wind moans like an old woman begging for meat, worship tree. Even then, it had a name. I kept digging. Archives. Obituaries. Personal diaries from mountain folk who never came down. One phrase appeared over and over, always in different variations, but unmistakably the same, the tree with blood for bark. They weren't all gone. A handful of people had escaped. Just like me. Spread across decades. In 1937, a veteran named Silas Corbin was found wandering the highway, naked and burned. He wrote a brief, paranoid letter before hanging himself from a water tower. The bark moves. The tree sings. It feeds and it remembers. I see my brother come out the trunk with no skin but still smiling. It's got voices inside. In 1972, a teenager named Joyanne McCurdy went missing for 2 weeks before being found in a hollow stump, still alive, clutching a necklace of human teeth. She never spoke again, but she drew pictures. I found one in an old therapist's portfolio. It was the tree. growing out of a person's mouth, roots pushing through their eyes. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt. It didn't just eat. It merged. I drove through the winding bloodlines of the Appalachians until pavement turned to gravel, and gravel to dirt. Deep in a valley choked with moss and broken signs, I found the one man who might help me. Preacher Amos Lark. His name had shown up 3 times, once in a blog from 2002 about local witchcraft, once in a court document where he'd been subpoenaed as an occult expert, and once on a laminated flyer taped to a gas station fridge advertising deliverance for those cursed by the soil. His shack sat at the edge of the trees like it was hiding from them. The air smelled of sulfur and wild garlic. He greeted me without smiling, just nodded, and opened the door. Inside, a wall of teeth in jars, dried herbs, newspaper clippings, a Bible marked with red meat juice instead of ink. "You seen the tree, boy?" he asked, voice like broken gravel. "It marked me," I said, and showed him the scar. He didn't recoil. He leaned forward and sniffed it. He whispered, "It chose you for rootstock." I told him everything. Cairnstead. The heritage tree. The festivals. The smell of skin cooking like pork crackle. The dog things. The voice that now lived in my dreams, telling me I was ready. He nodded once and reached into a drawer. What he pulled out wasn't a book. It was a bundle of stitched human skin wrapped around bone rods. A scroll. "This here's from Reverend Van Beck's original tongue. Scribed on tannered flesh, cured in child's fat. It's the old way." "What does it say?" I asked. He unrolled it gently. "It's the binding song. The only thing that might make that tree sleep. So we can kill it." He looked up at me, and for the first time, he smiled. A wide, toothless, rotting smile. "Boy, things like that don't die. They just digest." The sickness followed me. 3 nights after leaving Lark's shack, I woke up on my kitchen floor surrounded by raw meat. Pork, I think. Maybe. I don't remember buying it. The stove was still hot. Something had been cooking. I looked at my hands. Grease. Salt. Burn blisters. And a bite mark on my shoulder. Self-inflicted. The next day I got a call from a woman I'd spoken to once, part of a missing persons group who had a brother vanish near the same region in 1994. She called crying. Her cousin, who hadn't been in the Appalachians in over a decade, had just gone missing in her sleep. The windows were locked. The front door too. All they found were boot prints made of tree bark, leading into the bedroom and out through the wall. Something's changing. The tree's not just waiting anymore. It's reaching. I went back. I had no choice. The dreams turned to commands. Come home. Time to ripen. We are blooming in you. I followed the same trail I used to flee, but this time in reverse. The forest resisted me. Branches coiled like arms, bugs hummed in tongues I couldn't understand, and the ground bled when I walked on it. It wasn't how I remembered. Cairnstead was different now. The village was gone. In its place, the land had caved into a basin of bone-white grass and black water. At the center, the heritage tree had grown. Enormously. Its trunk was split open like a wound. And from the pulsing interior, faces peeked out. Translucent, like amniotic sacs filled with writhing things. People I'd met. People I'd seen at the festival. People I'd eaten with. Still alive. Still twitching. Still smiling. I read the scroll aloud. The wind stopped. The tree groaned, bark splitting into bloody fissures, revealing red muscle beneath. I chanted louder. The ground ruptured. Screams erupted from beneath, human screams, dozens, hundreds. Like the entire valley was stuffed with people, buried alive and screaming into root systems that kept them digesting forever. The tree opened its maw. It wasn't bark. It was bone and jaw, shaped like a trunk, surrounded by spiraling teeth. It began to suck in the air, the sound of 1,000 voices yelling my name in unison. We gave you a place. You took from our table. Come back inside. I held the final words of the scroll. And I swallowed them. The last of the binding song is meant to be consumed. One becomes the key. The moment I did, the tree shuddered. And it closed. The mouth sealed. The faces vanished. The bones in the soil turned to ash. It slept. But I knew it wouldn't last. I returned home, if you can call it that. A new apartment. A different state. But every night, I hear the bark creaking in my walls. I see mushrooms growing from my carpet, white and soft and shaped like human ears. A man called me yesterday. One of the researchers I met during my investigation. He asked if I'd planted anything lately. No, I said. He sent me a photo. It was a tree. In his living room. One of its roots had grown into the frame of his child's bed. And on the bark were smiling faces. They're spreading. I only bought time. We aren't escaping. We're germinating. It began with my teeth. I woke to find one loose, a molar near the back. The gum around it soft as sponge cake. When I pulled it free, there was a small white sprout embedded in the root. A seedling. I burned it. I burned the entire bathroom. But the rot didn't stop. My tongue began tasting ash and fat, even when I drank only water. The inside of my eyelids pulsed like bark, and every time I blinked, I swore I saw silhouettes behind me. The tree had marked me. But worse, it had planted me. The heritage tree, the herald tree, whatever name it wore, it wasn't a relic. It was a species. A carnivorous contagion, using humans as compost, stories as seeds, and trauma as sunlight. And I had carried it out. I wasn't the only one infected. People I'd never spoken to began sending emails, tweets, DMs. All said the same thing: why do I keep dreaming of the festivals? What is the bone drum made from? They offered me pie, but the crust had eyes. Please help me. I'm growing wrong. One man live-streamed himself digging into his thigh with a kitchen knife. He screamed the whole time, but it wasn't out of pain. He screamed, "I have to let the roots out." I collected the names. 42 in total. Every single one of them had either watched the original Kernstead documentary, pulled from YouTube a year ago, listened to the Urban Legend podcast I guest spoke on, or followed someone who had the tree was using information to spread a mythovirus. A mimetic germ. Like a fungal spore that only bloomed when you heard the wrong note in the right song. And I was its carrier. I returned to the region one final time, at least that's what I told myself. There was a town called Rakers Hollow, about 15 miles from the remains of Kernstead. Normal place. Church, post office, gas station. Nothing odd. Until it disappeared. Not in the traditional sense. It still existed on the map. Still showed up in GPS. But when I arrived, no lights. No people. Only doors swinging open in the wind. And the sound of chewing. Inside the homes, the walls had warped, wood panels curling like lips, wallpaper flaking in patterns that resembled nerve endings. And everywhere, bones. Picked clean. Arranged in ceremonial wreaths. One house had an infant's crib stuffed with hands. Just hands. In the schoolhouse, a message written in blood across the chalkboard: we were fed, and we are full, but never finished. I followed the trail to the center of town, where the park once stood. Now, a sapling rose from the mulch. Only 8 feet high. thin, young. But the bark already wept. I tried to burn it. It screamed. Not like wood. Like a child. My body is no longer my own. I sleepwalk now. Wake with dirt under my nails, blood between my toes. My spine itches. No, it shifts. I feel things growing where nerves should be. I am sprouting. I record myself sleeping. Watch the footage later. I don't just move. I speak in voices not mine, a woman from 1914 begging for her son's life. A man with a cleft palate screaming, the marrow's still fresh. A child humming, happy birthday, while chewing on what looks like a foot. My left leg is swelling. Bark-like texture spreading over the shin. It pulses. I think there's something inside trying to break out. I went to a doctor. He took an X-ray and locked the door behind him. "You need to leave," he whispered. "I don't want to know what this is. I don't want to see you again." He quit the next day. Moved states. I think I saw roots in his beard. There's only one way to end it. I must become the new altar. Lark told me the Herald tree only blooms when one of its offspring achieves full decay. That's how it spreads. That's what Cairnstead was, a host vessel, grown fat and ripe, waiting to burst. I am now that vessel. I returned to the ruined site. Or tried to. But the landscape has changed, melted like wax. Time bends here. The sun doesn't rise. The moon stays too large. The sapling from Raker's Hollow followed me. It walks. It doesn't need roots anymore. It uses legs. I'm preparing a fire. I've soaked my skin in pitch. I've carved the final verses into my stomach. Tonight, I burn. If I scream, don't listen. If I laugh, it isn't me. If this spreads further, may whatever's left of me in these words serve as a warning. The tree remembers you. And it wants you back. I spent 3 weeks at the State Archives in Charleston. Most of the Cairnstead records have been purged, officially due to a landslide and floodplain instability. But in one box, mislabeled as part of a mining settlement registry, I found what I was looking for, Dr. Saul Ettinger's original journal. Ettinger wasn't a botanist or a forest ranger like the old stories claimed. He was a field anthropologist from Cornell, embedded in Appalachian communities between 1946 and 1952. According to his notes, Cairnstead wasn't a random mountain village. It was one of several intentional settlements created under Project Resurge, a post-war experiment to test isolated community growth after a nuclear event. But something went wrong. Ettinger's entries grew increasingly disturbed, festival every night now. Weight gain encouraged. Animal protein substituted with neighbor meat. The children are always smiling. Too quiet. One asked me if I wanted to see the kitchen under the hill. They worship something beneath the old oak. They say it feeds through us. His final note, fire cleans nothing. They will rebuild. The archives ended there. But one word was underlined, over and over, heritage. I started craving meat again. Not in a metaphorical way, viscerally. I'd wake up standing in the deli aisle at 3 a.m. chewing raw slices before I realized what I was doing. One night, I caught myself trying to eat a stranger's hand. In the subway. He had nodded off, and I'd reached for it, half asleep, like I was dreaming. I vomited for 2 hours after. The next day, I threw out everything with meat. Even protein bars. Even broth. I went vegan overnight and locked myself indoors. But the withdrawal came fast and ugly, migraines, nausea, skin crawling like ants lived under it. And then the nightmares started again. Cairnstead. The kitchen. The cellar. And the tree. Only now, I realized it wasn't some god thing or interdimensional root system. It was the gallows tree, the one used for executions. The one whose roots had soaked up so much blood it now grew knots shaped like faces. It wasn't cursed. It was fed. I found one of the old townspeople, Mary Beth Loden, now in her 80s, living in a convalescent home in Elizabethton. She didn't remember Cairnstead, at least not until I mentioned the festival. Then she started crying. We didn't know what it was at first. It just tasted good. The pies. The meat. The stews. Everyone said it was goat. Was it? I asked. No, she trembled. Goats don't have wedding rings. She told me the festivals began after the first drought, when people started disappearing. The meals got bigger. The meat sweeter. But no one asked questions because they didn't want to know. That tree, it don't eat people. We do. And it just grows from that. Why the tree then? I asked. Why celebrate around it? Because it don't judge us. Because it remembers everything we bury and gives it back. The smiles. The songs. The recipes. So it's just a tree. It's never just a tree. I checked into a motel near where Cairnstead had stood. There was nothing left now, just forest. I wandered the trails. I waited for something to happen. But it didn't. No hallucinations. No sounds. Just trees. Then, I found a root collar that looked like a jawbone. I tried to dig beneath it. After 6 inches, I hit bone. Femur. I called the police. They came, but didn't dig. Said it was animal remains and told me to go home. They didn't see the bracelet caught in the roots. I didn't argue. I understood now. No one wants the truth. No one wants to admit a town used generational cannibalism as a survival tactic, wrapped it in ritual, fed it to their kids, and buried the bones under a tree because it was easier to worship something than to face themselves. That night, I brought firewood. Kerosene. Matches. I burned the tree. It howled, but not like a beast. Like 100 boiling pots screaming at once. I watched until sunrise. The bark cracked. The meat smell returned. And then it stopped. I moved again. New name. New address. The urges are manageable. Mostly. I still flinch at certain smells. Still dream of the cellar beneath the butcher's tent. But I'm clean. A journalist called last week. Said he was writing a piece on forgotten towns and found something called the Heritage Cookbook in a flea market bin. Said it had my name in it. I told him to burn it. He laughed. Nah, man, it's just old Southern recipes. Bit weird though. Some dishes are named after people. Like what? One's called Aunt May's Heart Stew. Another's Caleb's Last Sunday Roast. Kind of funny. He paused. Hey, you ever hear of a place called Cairnstead? I hung up. I know how this spreads now. Not by roots. Not by dreams. By memory. By nostalgia. By heritage. And we pass it down like heirlooms, like cast iron pots, like dinner prayers. All it takes is one bite.